to extradite or not to extradite? That is the question, which the Westminster Magistrates Court in the UK will answer on 10th December in the long-running Vijay Mallya extradition case. For the judge to make the final decision here on Mallya's extradition and decide whether or not to do so, they must be satisfied that first, whatever Mallya is accused of amounts to an extradition offence, that is, it's a crime in India and the UK. Secondly, that none of the bars to extradition apply. Thirdly, that there is prima facie evidence of guilt. And fourth, extradition would not breach the person's human rights. So, what can we expect to come out of Monday's decision? Well, it's a bit tough to say, to be honest. The CBI has presented evidence to the UK government that Mallya conspired with IDBI Bank to get loans for Kingfisher Airlines by fraudulent means. This isn't just about not paying back the loans. That would not attract criminal liability for Mallya himself necessarily, since the loans were taken in the company's name. And this would not have amounted to grounds for extradition. But because there's an allegation of fraud, this would very much be an extraditable offence. On the basis of the evidence provided by the CBI to the UK's Crown Prosecution Service has informed the court that the CBI has provided enough evidence to make them believe that the case is serious enough and that Mallya should stand trial in India. Mallya, on the other hand, has argued that the effort to extradite him and this whole case against him is sort of a witch hunt. It's a motivated thing where it's got a political angle to it. Now, he has contested the CBI charge sheet and raised doubts over the credibility of the CBI itself. So, he's used the 2G and the Arushi cases to do that, and these sort of controversial cases were also used by him to say that he won't get a fair trial because there were allegations in these cases that evidence had been fabricated or that things were ignored and not done in the proper manner. Now, there is also the fact that the investigating officer in Mallya's case is Rakesh Asthana, who is at the heart of the whole CBI versus CBI fiasco. Mallya alleges that he threatened banks to make statements against him to ensure that he'd be brought back. Now, Mallya has also argued that he shouldn't be extradited because of the poor condition of jails in India and sort of the risk of torture that would take place in there. Till recently, this used to be grounds for the UK courts to refuse extraditions to India. Bookie Sanjeev Chawla was able to use the same expert, in fact, that Mallya is using to say that because he'd be treated badly in jail, he should not be extradited to India. And that's what the magistrate court held back in October 2017. However, in November this year, the UK High Court actually overturned that decision. They rejected the reasoning and sent the case back to the magistrate's court for reconsideration. Now, Indian authorities have submitted evidence from Arthur Road Jail in Mumbai, which is where Mallya would be kept in custody if he is extradited, to try and ensure that the facilities are adequate and there is no cause for concern. Mallya's lawyer, Claire Montgomery, has tried to sort of rubbish these claims and said, you know, look at the state of the jails, this has just been done to make you look like it's okay, it's just been sort of beautified and so on. But now that there has been a decision by the UK High Courts in the Chawla case, it may be that this argument will no longer stand for Mallya. So, will we see Mallya back in India in handcuffs? At the end of the day, India's extradition record is unfortunately pretty terrible, especially when it comes to the UK. Only one person has ever been extradited from there, one of the accused in the 2002 Gujarat riots. And this was because he didn't even oppose his own extradition. With the other factors thrown in about fair trial, torture, etc., including, as we've mentioned, Rakesh Asthana's sort of involvement in the recent CBI versus CBI fiasco, it is quite possible that the court refuses to allow Mallya's extradition. If this were to happen, India could still appeal the issue all the way up to the UK's Supreme Court. It's a two-stage appeals process, though this would mean a long drawn-out process that could take years and would not necessarily guarantee any success. Now, let's say the magistrate decides to actually recommend Mallya's extradition. Even then, it's still not game over for the dethroned king of good times. He can immediately file an appeal, which will be taken up in the event the Secretary of State decides to extradite him. Because at the end of the day, when a court in the UK recommends extradition, it goes to the Secretary of State, who has to consider whether or not this needs to be done, and they look at whether there are any legal bars to extradition. So these include a risk of death penalty, or that the person could be tried for some other offence that they've, rather than just the extradition offence itself. Or that this is a matter of sort of a political witch hunt or something like that. This is a factor which can be looked at. Now, Mallya can send his own arguments against extradition to the Secretary of State, who would then have to make a decision within 2 months. So remember, we get a decision on Monday, then it goes up to the Secretary of State, then within 2 months they have to make a decision. But even there, the Secretary of State could take longer than 2 months as well. It's not entirely necessary. Now, if the Secretary of State decides to extradite him, then Mallya's appeal kicks in and he goes up to the High Court, where they will be analyzing both the Secretary of State's decision as well as the decision for it to be referred there in the first place. Now, let's assume that the High Court also upholds the extradition process. And again, remember, this is several months, perhaps even a year or two down the line. Then Mallya can still go and appeal to the Supreme Court if a substantial question of law is involved. So, what the main takeaway here is there's a long way to go in terms of months, if not years, before any decision to extradite Mallya becomes final. Even once all these legal avenues in the courts are exhausted, this doesn't mean the Secretary of State will necessarily order his extradition or immediately do so. They still have a lot of discretion. I mean, look at the Tiger Hanif case, one of Dawood's aides. All his legal avenues and appeals were rejected by 2013, but he still hasn't been extradited from there because the Secretary of State still hasn't made a decision. So, basically at this point what we know is that the decision on 10th December is really not going to be the end of the story. Nevertheless, a win for India would be encouraging, showing that we can actually win these kind of cases and we are actually going to be able to ensure justice even for criminals who run away, and would also be pretty good PR for this government.